Hello. Thank you for joining us this evening, both to our in-person audience and our online viewers. I'm Mita Mahado, Associate Curator of Public and Youth Programs at the Henry Art Gallery, and I'd also like to point out Ian Saporin, our Public and Youth Programs Manager, who is running tech tonight back in the booth. Thank you, Ian. I'll open by acknowledging that we at the Henry Art Gallery live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections, indebtedness, and responsibilities to the peoples and the more than human kin where we live and work. As we spend this time together, I ask that you join us in paying respects to elders, past, present, and future, and to consider what paying those respects means within the work that we do as individuals and within institutional frameworks. We are so excited to have Diana Al-Hadid with us this evening to help usher in Archive of Longings, which will be opening to the public this Saturday, along with Barbara Earl Thomas and Derek Adams' exhibition, Packaged Black. Archive of Longings is held in conjunction with the Feminist Art Coalition, a nationwide initiative of art projects that seek to generate cultural awareness of feminist thought, experience, and action. As you'll see, Diana's practice is intersectionally situated. Born in Aleppo, Syria, and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, she explores in her work the interplay between the female body and the European art canon, Syrian, Muslim, and immigrant histories and mythologies, and architectural icons, and the natural world. In conception and embodiment, her work is simultaneously massive and weighty, and delicate and vulnerable. I'm confident that what Diana shares this evening will inspire you to come back this weekend and spend time with the incredible sculptural projects that make up the exhibition. A note that lead support for Archive of Longings is provided by Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Feminist Art Coalition at the Henry is made possible in part by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts. At the end of the talk, we will have time for Q&A, which Diana is particularly looking forward to. And I will have a few instructions on what that will look like as we reach that point. So with that, please join me in welcoming Diana Al-Hadid.
Thank you, Mika. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump right in because I'm a little nervous. I have not spoken about my work in, since pre-COVID. And I've been thinking about it kind of differently since then, but I guess how that manifests remains to be seen. But I'm going to look at a lot of work over the years, but it's sort of abridged because I'm focusing more on a lot of the work that's maybe indirectly related to the figure or to the body. And I'll start here. This is, as Mita mentioned, I was born in Aleppo, Syria. And I came to the States when I was about 5. And this is a Halloween costume that my mother made for me when I was freshly I guess, inaugurated into kindergarten or first grade, I don't know. And that's my brother. He still dresses like that. But I'm going to skip further ahead and share. I guess this is the first sculpture that I did after grad school. It was probably like a couple years after grad school, and I'm sharing it because I think this is when I sort of had a better understanding of how I integrate materials and how I can be a lot more improvisational and more, I don't want to say reckless, but sort of reckless with the process a little bit. So this is called Spun of the Limits of My Lonely Waltz, and as you can see, it's an upside-down cathedral, which I made by painting the soles of my feet and dancing the waltz so that you would get a kind of a squarish pattern. And those are my feet upturned, which, as a Muslim, growing up, you're never supposed to show the soles of your feet. You're never supposed to wear shoes into a mosque. It's the feet hold this very both sacred and maybe shameful place. And you'll see that the feet and other kind of body parts, heads, are factor into my work. And so as I was making that piece, I was looking a lot at European Gothic cathedrals, and noticed a lot of these kind of Celtic, these labyrinths on the in the naves, and a lot of the work at the time. For example, this one, a lot of these works kind of started on the ground in the same way that the cathedral was like the footprints. It was made by using those footprints and extruded up. So a lot of the early work takes these labyrinths and kind of pulls the form up to create, like, for example, this. I guess it's like a pipe organ spaceship. And you can see that there's kind of an imagined character or figure that could enter or not enter. This is another, I think it's called Portal to a Black Hole, where there's really no place for a figure to enter, but you can always kind of see inside. You can always see through them. You can imagine sitting in a location. You can imagine kind of walking through the labyrinth. And then I realized, too, that a lot of the references that I was looking at were, there are a lot of old master paintings, European old master paintings. I also look at a lot of, in time I've looked at so many different things, but this was the history that I was kind of educated on as an art history major in undergrad. I was also a sculpture major. So I would literally sometimes just take a printout of my favorite paintings or something that for whatever reason I was gravitating towards at the time, and sort of carve, from that flat image, right? So carve a sculpted form while looking at the flat painting, and really obliterating all of the details in the painting, and thinking about just how it would take a different form. This is called self-melt. And actually this piece ends up, I think, coming through in a lot of later works. It's literally a melted version of the top. And that's Bruegel's Tower of Babel. So this was a lot of work that had to do with these kind of towers that have cracked open, or these kind of super ambitious projects that maybe integrated a lot of the failings that, because I'm very aggressive when I work. So I was always shocked by people's interpretations of these works, because I was like, I'm just really strong. I just push stuff over and things fall. And in the end, it looks like, something really bad happened, when really I had actually built up a lot of it. And it was kind of all this positive energy. But for example, I look back at this one and it looks a lot more to me like a volcanic eruption, like a kind of a tower. This is for the Sharjah Biennial. And a lot of these are very, very improvised. This is the first work that I made that where I really wanted to direct my attention to the figure as a trope. In the previous works that were kind of more architectural or pseudo-architectural, the figure was there by way of my own body or kind of projected body. But here I took another image of a marble figure in repose, and you can kind of see, and kind of extruded it again into a form. But in the back, it was really flat. And I started making kind of all these other kind of using flat forms to create these precarious towers. Or in this case, kind of, you can see there's another female figure in repose, and she's sitting on a kind of spiraling galaxy pedestal. It's called Edge of Critical Density, and it's kind of referencing a strange cosmological term that measures the expansion of the universe by taking a look at an equation that measures how much matter is in a certain amount of space and how, and then determines if the universe is expanding or contracting. That's as far as I remember. And this is a work that was my first bronze, and here it's called Immortal Repose. And here I thought I'm going to really look again at, with the figure proper, right? And I feel like in some ways it felt like at the time like a really really sharp turn, but it did remind me a lot of the process self-melt, where I kind of took the top and kind of melted it, and then it was the base for the bottom piece. And here she's very like self-aware, she's kind of like playing with her melt, and her feet slide off, but they're still connected. And then the feet again come into my work here. So this is being my first bronze. I wanted to play a little bit with, the different ways that it could, that I could kind of express the material and the patina. So I made these as sort of like I thought of them as sort of drawings alongside the sculpture. And then that piece, like every piece that I make, has some kind of germ of knowledge that then can be, that becomes, germinates into another sculpture. So the pedestal was like, that was the first time that I actually like used a proper pedestal, which, if you had told me in undergrad that I was gonna make a bronze sculpture on a pedestal, I would have like, tore my hair out or something. Like I would never do that. But there it was, the pedestal. Yet another kind of sculptural trope that I always, fought against, but you also like inherit anytime you create an object, right? Like the way that it's framed and the way that it's put into the world. And, there's so many things that you take for granted that, like how tall a pedestal is, how wide it is relative to the form, how it helps connect the object to the ground, again, in the way that feet do. And in some ways, it's like a kind of stand-in for a figure sometimes, right? So this is called Cenotaph for Two, and you can see I took, again, this pedestal, but really kind of tore it apart and opened up this narrative that kind of brought forward these two figures. Because cenotaphs are they're never for two people, they're always for either, a cenotaph is like a grave marker, sort of, or like a memorial, and it's usually for an idea or an event. So it'll be like for a war memorial or something, or for the idea of like one person, but whose body is not actually buried there. So I thought that was just such a weird, it's a strange category of memorials. So I introduced two figures. And here, this is kind of another two figures, but with an implied third figure that I kind of imagine triangulating on the other side. And this work is called, oh, hot in here. This work is called Gordeva's Fourth Wall. And it's the first time that I bring up this character that becomes kind of a big part of my my storytelling or my work. This figure Gordeva. It's based on a short story by it's a little novella actually by William Jensen, and became popular when Freud kind of brought the work into popularity by kind of analyzing it as an allegory of the psychoanalytic process. It's the story of an archaeologist who becomes really fixated on a bas-relief, a figure of a woman walking through a wall. And she's kind of like mid-step, and her feet are lifted up, and he kind of like obsesses over her feet. Like, we'll study the arc of her foot for 30 pages. Is like an art historian, and it's interesting because then you start to realize like this guy sort of becomes sort of a stalker. Like he starts to hallucinate this woman from this sculpture, starts to see her like throughout the city of Rome, and follows her all the way to Pompeii, and then kind of starts to disappear into the ruined buildings, and she's kind of she's a complete apparition. But at times he starts to talk to her, and by the end of the story, he realizes that she's actually been his childhood crush this whole time. And Freud kind of took that to mean that this archaeologist is sort of excavating his all of these kind of repressed desires, layer by layer as he kind of chases this dream through. There's an interpretation that he wrote called Delusion and Dreams. Anyway, she's very heavily quoted in the 20th century. Like the surrealists, like Dali called Gradiva, Gala Gradiva, and she comes up in like a lot of surrealist texts. And later, like Derrida speaks about her and Freud's interpretation, and then like people have interpreted Derrida's interpretation. So she kind of keeps going. And I'd made a lot of work that kind of looked at the relationship between the object, the figure on the pedestal, or two figures, or three figures, or an imagined kind of triangulated figure. But I had it made kind of like a small community, so I was thinking about that when I made these works, and I was looking at a lot of this work called Nolli's Orders, and I was thinking a lot about, or looking at a lot of like Mannerist paintings, where these kind of loungy figures that would kind of defy gravity, like a lot of Pontormo. And so these are some, I can talk about that piece for a long time, but I'm going to keep going. This one too. This one's called Suspended Afterimage. And, you know, sometimes I get kind of trapped on like, or kind of, I get super hyper-focused on a single detail. I'd been to Spain and saw this painting on the right. It's an unknown master who, which might mean a woman, who usually means a woman, I'll say. But I got really fixated on this cloak, so I snuck a picture. And I started to, I think I started to have this like collection of cloaked figures where the pattern kind of defied the movement of the cloth, or where the pattern really looked kind of, you know, structural and very important, like an integral part of the painting. It's like the area that, you know, that you know that the painter like really lavished their talent on. And I wanted to think about how I could kind of bring that lacy, delicate, you know, ornament and give it a kind of strength. So I made this as a kind of a pillar in my sculpture. This was the first time that I used anything remotely assisted with like digital technology. I make everything by hand, all the like hardware and all the attachments and everything. But well, not the bolts. I don't make the bolts by hand. I'm not that crazy. But anyway, so then I started to think about how I might kind of treat the painting as structure, as like kind of delaminate the structure from the paint, let's say. So I separated all of the paint marks, like all of the drips, and kind of used them as this modular system to build this kind of environment where the painting is kind of extruded. And I had all these like weird arbitrary rules. Again, I could talk about this piece for a really long time, but and you know, an after image is that phenomenon when you kind of like stare at something for a really long time and then you close your eyes and you see its inverse. So it's kind of like, in some ways, like a kind of a flipped memory, or like I don't know. I kind of like inverses and like things that are almost twins. I think I share that with my husband. So yeah, after I kind of figured out how to make this process of these sort of floating drips of color or drips of paint, because you know I don't think naturally a painter. I mean, I think maybe I'm getting a little better, but I respond mostly to materials and space. I'm not like, I don't have a spontaneous picture in my mind that I paint. And I don't know if that's what painters do, but that's like my like cartoony image of like what a painter does. It's like kind of, I don't know. That's why I don't quite feel like a real painter, but I started to think about, these images that I'm using and pulling and where they're coming from and all that. And really kind of where the picture plane starts and stops, right? So having figured out how to make this kind of suspended drip is kind of like a fresco type process. I realized that I could use it as sort of an architectural intervention or as a way of actually building kind of weightless pedestals or very, pedestals that are very like not supportive. So this piece is called Antonym, and I formed those drips, those colors on the interior of this figure. That's not quite a figure, so it's a weird work. And even when I would make some of these larger scale pieces, I would still kind of, in some ways, be looking at an image, and this is, again, upon Tormo, it's a visitation. I love visitation paintings. They're, two pregnant women coming together to meet. And it's just very powerful, kind of Christian trope. They have like the Annunciation. They have all, so visitation is one of my more favorite ones. So I kind of played with kind of borrowed the proportions, if you will, of this work, and you can kind of see the steps here. I kind of used the steps there, and kind of imagined some of the figures that would have been in the painting. But I removed all of the figures, so, and then I kind of created this kind of draping enclosure, or this kind of wavy enclosure. So you couldn't see kind of behind the painting, you would just have to see it from the front. Sorry, some of these are blurry, but as I started to explore this process, I realized that, I couldn't wait until there was like a wall I could cut and, work with that. So I started to make them as individual painted, as like paintings that you can kind of hang. And that allowed me to really learn a lot about colors and structure and skin, and again, let me play with that problem of the picture plane a little bit. So how do I jump to this? This is called Head in the Clouds, and you'll see in the show, and I'll show you at the end. I don't have images of them now, but a long time ago, I made, well, I have images of them in this slide, or in this talk, but not, I should have put them here. But anyway, I made these works called the Blind Busts. It's kind of a series, and they're bronze kind of busts of heads. And the original, they're from 3 separate heads, and I made them basically by kind of trying to make a self-portrait, or self-portrait without looking. It's kind of like a old, I don't know, I imagine it's like an art school, I never had that assignment in art school, but it seems like it'd be a fun thing to do. It seemed like a fun thing to do, what would it look like if I couldn't, really look at myself, how would it, if I couldn't look at what I was actually touching, would it look like myself? Would it look like my face? So I made 3 of those heads, and I ended up using them in 3 unique sculptures. So this is one of them. I had another collection of a lot of these paintings of saints kind of holding their little homes. And so I made a little model of, they're not the homes, they're like the churches that they would give money to or whatever. So I made mine holding my home in Canton, Ohio, which is where I grew up after Cleveland. And this is like the second of the heads that I made into one of the blind busts. And I really feel like this work was made so much for this space and for this mirror. As you walk into the room and it's facing you, it's called the Drifter. And there's a third one too that'll come up. This work is called Phantom Limb, and you can see this familiar figure was the one that was used for Antonym. I became so attached to it, it was kind of literally collecting dust in the studio. And so I thought I would kind of try to dignify the cast-off object. So weird, the evolution of this piece is really weird because for a long time, I didn't know where it was going, literally and metaphorically, but she kind of migrated up here, and then I created this kind of like a cascading landscape where almost like her gravitational pull was dragging all of this sediment with her. That's kind of what these towering pedestals are kind of made of. And I had this the leg that kind of broke off when I was casting it. I had it just kind of tossed on the ground in the studio. And every day I noticed that, I don't know, I just didn't want to touch it, like step over it, or no one moved it. It just sat arbitrarily in this spot. And I got really attached to its location relative to the figure. And so I put a pedestal under the foot, and I kind of created a path to it, and I called it Phantom Limb. And so a lot of my work sometimes, like I don't have a big conception at the beginning of the work because I really don't, again, I focus on like one thing and try to tell its story, and then it turns into this whole big project. It gets bigger, I guess. So this was this was at the Vienna Secession, the first time I showed Phantom Limb, and she was kind of bracketed by two floating wall panels, so I could kind of make these kind of like embedded, dissolving-looking frescoes. And on one wall, I made this. I used was moved by this strange Hans Memling painting. And I love allegories. So this is called Allegory of Chastity. And again, you remember that the story of Gradiva is sort of an allegory, right? It's like a story told through symbolism. And I don't know, it's a creepy image. I think it's creepy even more when you know the title, like that it takes this like giant mountain skirt for her to be protected, like for her chastity to be like protected. And so she was on one wall, and on the other wall is Gradiva. And this is the kind of the original, the bas-relief, the sculpture of Gradiva. You can see this is like her famous footstep. Her footprints are like feature really heavily in this story. At the end, actually, it's kind of cool, and it relates a little bit to the show, so I'll tell you. At the end, Norbert, who's the archaeologist, kind of wants, I read this thing where Freud was talking about how he wanted to see, there's a footprint where it's kind of like the last moment before she dissolves and kind of dies, and he wants to see that moment when her foot creates the footprint. And Derrida sort of thought about how that moment is kind of the like deep contradiction that historians and archaeologists, and I think artists or myself, I will include myself in this, where a moment where you kind of want to both archive the moment and witness the moment simultaneously. It's like a complete impossibility. But in that kind of moment where that footprint happens, and there's an instant record of this kind of death of this event, or of his of Gurdjieff. Anyway, it kind of, I feel like it relates to the show. So, and also this is this piece called Moving Target, which is also in this show. You can see there's kind of these three heads at the top, and they're kind of surveying. This show is called The Fates. The Fates are kind of there's these three sisters that one I believe, I forget what the first one does, but the second one like pulls the string, and the third one cuts the string. I forget what the first one does. I don't know. Does anyone know that? Just spins it. Yeah. That, Shamim. And these works are also in the show, but they're positioned in a different way. It's a smoke screen. This is the first one that I made that you could kind of like where you could walk through the wall. And this is the third of those original blind bust heads, the original clay. And again, they're always kind of drifting off of their pedestals. All of my figures and all of my stories they don't really respect the pedestal. They kind of are off center. So this is kind of an imagined eruption out of a volcano with this kind of smoke collar. And so you can see in like all of those works, the pedestal or the midsection of the sculpture is kind of this ambiguous narrative that I've had to kind of pull together by knowing the head and knowing the base. I know the foot. I know how the sculpture kind of meets the ground. I have that established. I still kind of work like this. I know the beginning and the end. I don't know the middle. So a lot of the work is in kind of bridging those two events, those two things. This is a mirror that kind of was inspired by this mirror, this detail that I saw. It's outside the Paris Opera, and you can see it's a stone sculpture that's carved to catch the reflection. This is a carved stone mirror. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I just thought it was so incredible to kind of try to carve, something completely ephemeral. It's a reflection in a mirror, but it was really effective. And this is also in the show. This is another Gurdjieff that I made as kind of a large scale for a show at Madison Square Park called Delirious Matter. It's the first time my work was kind of surrounded by skyscrapers. And, the oval lawn is this very beautiful park here in the center. And I made this sort of a room that you could kind of get closer into these spaces, because these are, essentially walls, right? And the surfaces are very painterly, I guess. So I want to bring people a little closer, even though these are very big. So this is kind of my trick. And so this is another kind of opportunity where the two figures meet. The Gurdjieff figure that's very migratory and transitional and transient, and the figure from the Hans Memling painting, who's sort of busted out of her mountain, but essentially she's this very stable, very solitary and very stuck in a rock. It's a weird kind of pairing between the two. I didn't really realize how much they mirrored each other, kind of were the inverse of each other, until they showed them again here. You can see, so this is that painting again. And this is sort of like a diaphanous mountain that sat in the reflecting pools. So it created this double at sometimes. And then there were 3 other sculptures throughout the show called Synonym, which were taken, which is like kind of a pour over. It's like a weird process that I made kind of coming off of the piece Synonym, or Antonym. So Antonym came first, and Synonym, which was a unique sculpture, and Synonym was a multiple. So there's 5 of Synonym. It's kind of, I'm not really, like, I have never really been super good at multiples. Like, even when I make bronzes, they tend to be kind of one of, but I'm learning. I put her in Penn Station in New York City. This is DeCordova again. And this is a mosaic opposite. It's at the 2-3 line. This is the old Penn Station was this beautiful it was like a Roman, it was like based on the Baths of Calcutta. It's, if I'm saying that, it was destroyed. You wouldn't believe how beautiful Penn Station used to be. It was like destroyed in, I don't know, 50 something. But it spawned the architectural preservation movement. So this really sad building was not sacrificed for nothing, I guess. So after my show at the park, a lot changed in my head because it was the first time that I really had this comprehensive show of my work outdoors. And it got me thinking, I guess, what would happen with because DeCordova lives in the state of potential eruption at all times, because Vesuvius is kind of her background. It's her home. And, the melding figure lives in this rock, lives in a mountain. And I thought, what would happen to the melding figure if she erupted? Like, where would she migrate? What images would she develop or move into? So I started making these volcanic eruption panels. And then I made 5 of the head, of the same head, which is just that, that pencil drawing that you make when you're first kind of doing a figure drawing class, and it's kind of like the axial drawing of a face. It tells you that this is, when the chin is down, it's kind of like the symbol for piety. And I've never really worked with hands much, but I started to bring the hands out. Because she's sitting like with her hands kind of politely folded at the top of this mountain, kind of holding, in my kind of contemporary feminist reading, I'm seeing her as sort of plugging a volcano, right? Like she is in possession of her, she is self-possessed. She is, kind of like, I don't know if you remember, 3 or 4 years ago, it was like Gayle King interview. She's just sitting kind of composed and holding it all in, this eruption. So anyway, I made bronze portraits of her. And then I returned to the feet around the same time. Each one kind of has an accompanying foot in a way. I started making these panels. This is closer to, I guess, 2018 or 2019. No, 2019. This is the second of that series where I use this head again to kind of make a whole new figure kind of climbing out of the pedestal. And hands again here at the bottom. This is a picture I took. It was around this time in 2019, we were looking for need to kind of expand my studio because the show from the park came out of, I had to take a window down, and I was like, okay, that's it. I need like a ground floor space. So I started looking at some property, and the one that I was really liking, I saw this crazy event in the sky. It's called a perihelio. Can you see there's like 3 suns? Really freaked me out. So I thought I should kind of like, I thought that was like a sign. So I bought the place and then started reading about perihelios and found these really incredible renderings. It was from like a 15th century manuscript of like, it's called the Book of Miracles. All these like bizarre solar events in the sky. So that happens apparently usually in the winter when there's like small frozen icicles suspended in the sky, and around 4 or 5 when the sun's about to set, you might get this kind of event where you see literally three suns and a rainbow that circles around it. I mean, the picture didn't do it justice, but it really freaked me out. It was really, and then of course, and then we bought it, and then COVID happened. So I'm pretty sure that means I'm a witch. So I started making more of those feet, and then this was actually early 2020. This was for the Lahore Biennial. This was actually the biggest sculpture that I made, but it was made with like a very, very dedicated team, and I was directing them from the studio. It was basically based on a single sketch and some pretty specific parameters of how to build this building. It's actually kind of I took the archive. It's a building in Lahore called the Punjab Archives, and it's essentially the building that holds the records, the historic records of the city. And there's a legend that Anarkali's tomb is in this building. And for probably anyone here who doesn't know the story, she's a very kind of popular character, like in Pakistan and India and throughout. That she's like there's an Anarkali's market. There's like movies about her, but her story is that she was had an affair with an illicit affair with the crown prince, and the Mughal emperor at the time wasn't into it, wanted to punish her, and so sentenced her to be buried alive inside a wall. And of course, when I'm there, I'm hearing the story, like you can't take pictures, there's like a sarcophagus. It's really, really creepy and amazing and interesting. And I thought about how many stories there are of women who are trapped within the walls of buildings, or these kind of allegories of like, women as rocks, as buildings, as like immobile, objects, I guess. So I put, this was at the, this building in the background would have been, it's the Lahore Fort, so it would have been where the emperor would have kind of given the ruling. And I was working with all materials that were local, of course, and when I was there installing and finishing the work, I actually didn't know exactly how it was going to end, but I went into cemeteries because it is sort of a lifelong pastime, and noticed these incredible mounds and I thought it was such a moving experience, seeing somehow this raised earth where you know that there is a figure below, and just thinking about how different that is to Western burial, like cemeteries in the West where there's no sense of a body, there's a sense of an underworld, but anyway. So this is the building at night. And so you can see, I left the kind of crumbles of, there's whole markets. They have very skilled marble workers, and I was so tempted to get someone to kind of help me carve something. But instead, when I visited the place, there was just like mountains of cast off marble. So I brought, it doesn't look like very much, but I brought a lot of it over and put her right in the middle. And then this is a piece that was meant to ship. It was in 2020, kind of got landlocked in my studio. It was about to go out to This is the Memling Museum, which is in Bruges. I guess they commissioning artists who were looking at Hans Memling, and of course, having just done the show at the park. So this is another Hans Memling painting. Like the other one is not very, is not one of his more celebrated paintings. It's a little more simple, but what I learned about this is it's a triptych. It's St. John's altarpiece. What I learned was that the Virgin Mary is sitting on what historians call a Memling rug, which is a specific kind of basically Oriental carpet. So which has this kind of hooked motif around the border, and you kind of always knew that was Hans Memling's signature Oriental carpet. I thought that was a strange detail, and so I made my own carpet. So this on the other wing, this painting sits kind of opposite where this sculpture sits, and at that location there's this massive hole in the ground. It's like a 17-foot hole in the ground that looks like a burial site, but it's exposed earth, the exposed, from the time that Memling was painting. So it's really amazing to see, that the ground that you're walking on has nothing to do with that history, that time. It's layered. So of course I had to make something that kind of used that hole in the ground, and I put this kind of big Memling carpet and sort of pulled all the thread into a spool that then kind of drew the rest of the sculpture. And so this is the third of those Memling, kind of migrated Memling heads. This one lives there now forever. This was also soon after that. It's called Self-Delusions. And I think we're coming sort of to the end. These are just some more colorful, like after 2020, I think my work got a lot more colorful. Oh, and I was going to show you, these are the blind busts that I made a long time ago that were kind of the coming from those clay heads. But I reworked the patinas, so that's it. That's it for now. Any questions? I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Diana. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll need the mic, so people can hear your question online. So wait for me to give you the mic to ask the question. Hi, yes, beautiful work. I want you to talk a little bit about the materials that you use in your sculptures.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I sometimes forget to talk about the materials, which is funny because it's really it's the thing that generates so much of the forms and the work and the curiosities that I have in the studio. But they are sort of, they've been semi-consistent for the last 16, 20 years or something. Maybe since grad school more or less. So I use steel so I use wood, steel, plasters of different varieties. So in each category I use every kind of metal, right? So metals meaning steel, stainless steel, cast metals, so bronzes, aluminums, whatever. I basically use everything that is like an industrial, like anything you can get at Home Depot. Forget Home Depot, Lowe's. Anything, sorry. Anything you can get like at a home store or at like a sculpture supply store. So like clays, plasters, they're just, or fiberglass, I use like a lot of and this is foam. I don't use a ton of foam, but I use a lot of like found foam, or these are some of the this is what I said I wasn't going to talk about, but I moved them to the bottom of this talk because they're less overtly about the body, but this is foam. I use, and then bronze, and it's not very helpful, is it? It's that the process is uniquely, I invented this way of making these linear, kind of fragile forms, so they're not, so I think that's how it's hard to tell what it is. But yeah, they're made, I'll tell you a little bit about the process for these, because I think that's where a lot of maybe the mystery is. But actually, if you go downstairs and you look closely, you'll see that like something might look like there's, it's like I almost have to look at a specific sculpture and point out this part's wood, this part's plaster, this part's foam, this part's whatever, but because they all kind of integrate. But I'll tell you a little bit about how these are made. So these are essentially, they're almost like cast paintings, if you will. They're made in many layers as a result of many painted layers of it's a pigmented kind of a plaster. It's a polymer. It's pigmented, so I paint it, and then it gets reinforced, and then it kind of comes off of the mold, and it comes off, and it's like not very rigid, but it's very thin and strong. And then I embed this kind of armature behind it. So it's almost, I try to explain to people, it's almost like the image coming before the canvas, and like the skin coming before the structure. And so you can kind of see the history of the colors in the order that I applied them, right? Because when I pull it off the wall, the first mark that I made is the first mark that sits on the top of the surface. So it's kind of built from the back. So all of the things that are open here, like all of these openings, they're just areas that I didn't paint. And all of the drips are just me being sloppy, expressive. I don't know. Yeah, so I mean, there's this, they've changed so much over the years, to my mind anyway, or to, maybe. I think they've changed a lot, so I'm still figuring them out. Hi.
A couple times sets of rules created for different pieces, either for yourself or for installation. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, I'm not actually as rule-bound as most people, I think. I tend to always like undermine myself the moment I feel like I'm getting attached to something. Or like something feels a little too familiar to me. But I guess when I mean rules, like for example, when I danced the waltz and put paint on the soles of my feet, I knew that that was going to be like the kind of rule set that, that was going to kind of like establish the bones of that sculpture. Like when I laid out the labyrinth on the ground, and then I kind of traced the labyrinth and I pulled the work up. Like, I kind of knew that that was how it would start. And then I didn't answer a lot of questions after that. Like a lot of the sculptures just begin with sort of a material curiosity that maybe I hadn't fully explored in the previous work. Like maybe I had a hint about something working really interesting, in a strange way. And so I do like a little test quietly in the corner of the sculpture, and I figure it out a little bit. But then I realize that it can kind of become a whole full expression in another work. Yeah, like I guess for a while I got kind of used to how these were made in a way, not used to them, but I was like, I don't know. I realized that I started making them dark all of a sudden. I was like, why have I never made them all dark? And that, like, sort of, I don't know, so you have all these, you don't even notice them, you just kind of, because you can't change everything all at once, you can't like reinvent everything all, entirely, and like, no, not even Picasso did that, or whatever, Picasso, but like, no one's ever done that. So in my own work too, it's like, and everyone's work, you push a certain part of it, while maybe sometimes you're like, oh, have I even like thought about that this whole thing can be different, this whole other part of the work can totally be different, and then that affects everything else. I don't know, it's kind of getting like abstract and weird, but yeah, I don't know, watch out for rules. I guess like, use them like just to get you started, I guess, like, because sometimes they're just like, how can I get moving, like that first mark is very pregnant and potent, and it's really not, in my work anyway, I make like 1,000 decisions or more on a single work, so that first mark comes to mean less and less, and sometimes it disappears altogether, but it's so important just to get you in a certain flow, going in like a certain direction. So I feel like the rules are like kind of for that. It's like a way like, and I'm sharing all this with you guys only because I, presume you're interested, but like it doesn't necessarily, get noticed or read in, in my work later. It kind of comes out because I do enough of these, but it's not like, you would know right away that I danced the waltz or whatever. I don't like think about that when I'm making it. Like, it's just, I don't know. Now that I'm older, I'm like, yeah, I guess people are going to ask me, how did I start this? Or like, how did, I don't know. Maybe that one's not a good example, but let's move on. Thank you.
Since you mentioned your process being very organic and sort of cumulative with the material, how do you decide when to stop, or when a piece is finished?
It's like usually when the trucks are at the loading dock. Like, I was just telling someone that I probably part of the reason I don't live with my work in my home is because I'll probably scratch it forever and do something to it. In fact, that's been my problem this whole year. Since COVID hit, I have returned to 10 works and completely, I thought they were done, but I've gone through my full inventory of work and completely, the bronzes, for example, didn't look like that before, 2 months ago. And now I'm like, how did I not see the patina? But I think what happened was in a way, they're my blind busts, right? But after 2020, I'm like, I made them, now they can see, they've lived, and I gave them this patina, and I scratched out their eyes, and their eyes are kind of shiny. And I was like, oh, that piece hasn't been finished. I didn't finish it. It was, it was finished in its time, but actually, I don't know, even now, there's another, I'll show you, these are the ones I took out, but this piece, for example, is called, see, now I get to show you these. It's called Candle Clock of the Swordsman, of the Scribe. This one's the Scribe. I made several of these ancient time-telling devices that were kind of outlined in an instruction manual by an Islamic kind of a polymath and inventor named Al-Jazari. He worked in the late 12th century. And one of these devices is a way to tell time by kind of lighting a candle and letting the melted candle kind of pull a weight and create these kind of just a series of events, mechanical events. Anyway, they're time-telling devices, right? Ancient time-telling devices. And I thought this piece was finished. It came back into the studio, and of course I added all this extra time to it. As a time meaning this melted candle stuff. So it now looks like this. And I don't know. It wasn't, it wasn't anything near that. You can see how it started out. and then I just smothered it. And now I think it's done. I'm not going to touch this one. This one, the museum owns it, so that's it for me. But yeah, it's a problem. I don't know when they're done. I mean, they're kind of done, like, in some ways when I feel like I've answered everything I could at the moment. And I guess that's what's happened recently, is I realized that there were, like, parts that were unfinished all of a sudden. And so I'm going to finish all of those things, and then I'm going to do something different. I don't know. That's my 2020 calamity.
You said in your largest piece that you were working with a dedicated team. I was wondering
Yeah.
if any of your other works had dedicated teams for it.
That one was, I guess I just wanted to say that it was, yes, I mean, yes, I have assistants that have helped me for many years. My older work, I didn't have any assistants, so like, I mean, presumably you can't really tell because they're, I don't know, they're assistants, I pay them. So I tell them what I want something to look like or do. And but I mentioned the dedicated team in Lahore because it felt different to me to not be, I mean, I barely touched that piece, and yet it's the largest piece. I mean, that's like bordering on conceptual art for me, where like I'm not actually physically, but I gave them these very, strict kind of parameters about how many clusters of columns to scale and proportions of everything, and how many of X number of steel rods of this size, how many X number of cable for this size, and how to, so they had this kind of outline, but within that, they could bend the rods how they wanted, right? So like they were actually making the marks of, there was some limited interpretation, but it felt like, for me, very significant, because I would never, and my assistants like help with, I have, anything that's remotely like a creative decision is kind of falls on my lap, and then, so I'm very like protective of that. But they're laborious, so, I mean, and I'm in every phase of the work, like all the patinas you'll see out there. I have to go to the foundry, and I do each patina myself, so it's, I don't know. I don't know if I'll totally be able to give that part up, but there's certain things like preparing the molds. Like there's just a ton. I don't know. Like people have assistants, very common in the art world, in any profession, I guess. But yeah, I'm not like a lonely painter where I like sit and like paint on a canvas or whatever. But yeah, I'm there every step of the way. And like I said, because it's really hard for me to farm anything out, because like unless it's a bronze, unless it's a foundry, because I don't have those facilities. But if I did, I would make all of my bronzes myself, or with my team. Sculpting is kind of it's like more communal in nature because of casting, and they're big and they require two hands to lift and stuff. So it was like by necessity that I ended up. And people, I don't know, because like I said, because I make up a lot of the processes, it's really impossible to have anyone else make them, and sometimes attracts people to the studio because there's a number of different things. Like when I was younger, like people wanted to, intern with me because they could learn about welding, plaster, fiber, whatever, like everything, carving, casting. But yeah, that's my dedicated team. I just felt like they were so, I don't know, they were just so kind of part of that work in a way that I had not felt comfortable, had ever felt comfortable with. So that's why I mentioned them. I don't think so yet. Are they allowed to do that? I'm not sure.
No, it's not quite finished yet, so do come back on Saturday, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi.
Hi, Naomi.
You mentioned after your show at the park that things changed for you after having your first big show with outdoor work, and I would love to hear it.
Yeah, that's deep. I think, I mean, it's, in some ways it's sort of simple, like, it seems sort of obvious, like, suddenly, it's sort of like entrapment or something. Like, I realize I've been making these big, complicated monstrosities for so long, only so that, every so often, for like a month or so, some razor-thin percentage of the population in New York City, and even, that art-knowledgeable population, and then among them an even smaller razor-thin percentage. So it's like, I feel like no one ever sees my work, like you do all this, and you put it in a gallery, and like, that's it. It's up there for a second, it's gone. But I never like really cared, or I don't know. I was like, that's fine. These are my people. Like, I don't know. It didn't bother me. And then suddenly you're in the public. Like, I'm dragging out a section of this sculpture, and this guy's like, "You call that art?" I was like, "I don't know. I don't know anymore." Like, I thought it was. I was like, "It's not done yet. Just let me finish." So like, it's I was like, well, that's kind of powerful because, it's hard because like I like to create more space than I take up, even though the works are so big. I think that their transparency or I never really close space off completely. You can always want to puncture a thing, so you can kind of even psychologically navigate the interior, sort of. You can see above, and so it's tricky, but that was like a real reckoning, just to kind of just suddenly, because I also like spend so much time, or so much of my work looks back at like a long history. Like the closest I got was like sort of a reference in surrealism. But I mean, I actually love surrealism, and especially Dada. Like it was actually my focus in undergrad. But ironically, they don't like make anything. Like Dadaists are just like the least sculptural. Oh, I don't know, weird. They're weird. Why is they talking about them? Oh yeah, because I'm always looking at like old art, right? And all of a sudden, in this context, in like the middle of Manhattan, I'm like super contemporary. Like it looks really, like really shocking or something. And also just because, I feel like my work is so robust, and people were so like, I feel like for so long, people are like, see the work as like extremely fragile and delicate, and it sort of is, but it's also like worked over so much, and it's each inch of it is like reinforced and tended to, and I've gotten to be like, I have like a pretty good intuitive understanding of like basic engineering and triangles, but that took years to kind of get. So it's I finally could kind of like prove that these things could withstand hurricane winds or whatever this was, so that was like that part was kind of fun. But then also it like just blew the scale of my work totally out of proportion. Like I found myself, when I have a gallery space and it's an interior space, I want to go to the edges. Like I want to build literally all of my undergrad work, which I totally skipped over, was like room-size installations that literally touched wall to, like I needed them to touch a wall. Like otherwise it wasn't an installation, it was just a big object. It was like until it touched a wall, now we have an installation. I would sometimes like make jokey sculptures about that. Like I have like a little tail with like a bow tie connected to the wall or something, like so weird. But that felt for me like a real way to create like new kinds of spaces and new kinds of environments, and thinking about the politics of like landscape as a fictional thing, or as a projected imagined thing, or of realm in the realm of fantasy. There's so much to that. So here I had these things that usually they're so big, and they're very big. They feel really like this one feels kind of small, obviously, in comparison to like the Empire State Building, but like here inside it looks very big, and you can kind of see the dirt and you can kind of see everything. So I don't know. It did a lot. It did a lot for like. Kind of shifting the priorities of the thing when I got into the natural world, and it was like competing with leaves and tree branches and all of this other beautiful surround, and I was like, I guess, the first person to use planting materials in their exhibitions, which is really bizarre. Like I kind of dipped into the landscape budget to create this room, because I realized, and also like to use the water in the reflecting pool. But then I got really, I got the like planting bug too, and during COVID. And I know I won't even say how much I've spent on plants. Like I like it was just like perfect timing. Like having the show like a year and a half or a couple years before COVID, and then having bought the place upstate, it's a whole new material now to me. Like I'm thinking about soil science and like, moving earth, and, we're building. So like using excavators and like other basic, I don't know. So that's kind of entering my thing right now, thinking about land as, soil as material and like earth as material. So that, there's just so much that happened. And that was like the material stuff that I learned from the show, and the kind of social stuff that I learned from the show. But then there's like all of this conceptual stuff that I learned from the show, which is that that I can talk about for longer, but I'll leave it there. Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you all.
So, yes, I'm so excited for the show, and
Please come back, yeah.
y'all should come back this weekend for the opening, and let's all give Diana a round of applause.
Thank you.